Here we go.
Oh
Take
my
three.
gosh. Take three. First of all, okay, y'all, I think the universe is trying to make this difficult on us, and this is a testament to our perseverance, I think, to the dedication to making the pod happen. And so, Josh, I'm just really grateful we could make this happen finally, and that you've been working with me on the sound quality of the streaming. It's gonna be great. It's gonna be
It's
great.
it's very true to podcast, true to theme.
Y'all, I got Josh here today. He has been one of my Instagram friends for such a long time. Since COVID, I think is
Since
when we
COVID.
started,
Yeah.
following each other. And it's funny because everyone I have on here is basically someone I haven't met in real life, but you're like my internet friends. And I just think so highly of you, Josh, because you've always been so well spoken on the internet, and I just love reading your captions, honestly. So if you guys don't follow him, you should. We'll get to that at the end too, of like how can we find Josh. Um, but yeah, Josh, tell us kind of a little bit about yourself, like physically, where are you right now in the world? And two, what do you do?
So I am a physiotherapist, or I guess in the States you guys call them physical therapists. And I'm based out of Toronto, Canada. I think as you guys can see, this is the only sunny day that we've had for the past two months, I feel like. It's been cold, it's been gloomy, it's been rainy. So yeah, that's where I'm at.
I mean, you look great. Like the light is just illuminating your face.
The lighting here is a lot better than our first attempt, that's for sure.
Yes. And and you said you're a physical therapist or a physiotherapist. So, can you kind of walk us through one, when did you decide that's what your life calling was? And then how was that kind of how was the journey of deciding and then getting there? What was that like for you?
Yeah. I mean it's not the most I don't feel like it's the most interesting story, but I feel like for the most part, luckily things just kind of all fell into place. Like back in high school, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I knew I'd done martial arts for most of my life. I had kind of like an interest in the human body. So then I thought, oh, I'll just go do physio. I feel like most people kind of like are exposed to physio or physical therapy back when they're younger if they've had injuries and stuff. And it was the same for me. But I feel like I had no idea what physiotherapy or physical therapy actually was up until like day one of physio school. I remember on day one, they sat us all down and they were like, "How many of you guys know we can work in hospitals? How many of you guys know we can work with like neural cases?" And I remember half the class raised their hands, and I was part of the half that just sat there stunned that we could do that. So everything luckily fell into place.
Yeah, and look at you now. Like it's hard to find a good physical therapist if I'm being honest. And so like whenever I was going through stuff, I was like, honestly, Josh would be a great PT to go to. But you're also very far from me.
Very far.
So
It would
I
be it
didn't
would
re
be a bit of a flight.
I didn't realize how far Toronto is it, do you say Toronto or Toronto?
I love that you actually say Toronto instead of Toronto because I feel like that's a big way to tell who is from Toronto and who is not. Those that say Toronto.
Is that means that that's the right way to say it?
The people who say Toronto are the people who have never been to or do not live in Toronto. Is
Oh,
is is kind of
interesting.
like the going consensus. I feel like the less it sounds like Toronto, the more of a Torontonian you are.
Ooh, Torontonian. I like that. But yeah, I didn't realize that was East Coast time.
Ah,
So,
yes,
yes. Yes. I
yes.
I will say trying to align with people who are like East Coast, Pacific time, Central, and then sometimes I talk with people like in Europe. I don't know if you do that also, like networking wise. It's just really, it can get all over the place sometimes.
Time zones are my biggest nightmare, especially with like like you're saying with like international clients and stuff, time zones are my biggest nightmare. Every time I schedule something, I have a panic attack about whether or not we've set the right time, and then whether or not I'm going to show up on the call at a completely wrong time.
Literally
So yeah.
me with this podcast. Yeah. This episode. Yeah, so you take international clients?
I do. It's just like, of course, I don't take them as a physiotherapist, because legally I cannot. But I do work with clients internationally. I think like COVID has made that a lot more accessible in some ways. A lot more people are open to working with professionals virtually. A lot more people are like seeking out professionals virtually. So that's kind of opened those doors. Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome. So for those of you listening and you don't know Josh yet, he is an FRC practitioner as well. And so like a lot of your content is so great and educational in that stuff and like very well explained. So if you haven't taken the course, honestly, you could get a lot out of your captions, Josh. So do you do
Those
a lot of
captions.
FRC? Yeah. Do you do a lot of FRC with those clients online?
I do. I think like at the end of the day, it's no different from what I do with people in person. I think the only difference is I can't label it physiotherapy, and I can't provide someone a diagnosis, right?
Right.
Those are the biggest things. But at the end of the day, a lot of the treatment style of what we do is very similar. It's a blend of kind of like FRC principles, FRC concepts with just general strength and conditioning and rehab based principles as well. And I feel like a lot of those go hand in hand anyways.
Yeah. I really like your approach, and maybe we can kind of dive into this a little bit more as a physical therapist. You don't do it the traditional way with, 3 sets of 10 mini band walks, clamshells, kind of maybe like talk us through your evolution as a PT of how you've assessed maybe and treated. I know it's hard with like treatment different problems, but like how is the evolution of you being a PT kind of unfolded?
The evolution has been wild actually, because back in school, I was convinced that I was going to be like a manual therapy guru coming out of school. Um, like that was the only thing I was focused on. I hadn't really done much exercise prior to that, aside from like martial arts related stuff. Hadn't really spent much. I hadn't really stepped foot in a gym prior to that much. So like coming out of school, I feel like I was very much the bad PT, right? Kind of like I thought all we did was rub people a little bit, kind of hook them up to some machines, and then tell them what was wrong with them, and essentially kind of like give off the idea that exercise was bad.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then kind of took a little bit of a step back because things I feel like just weren't working. Um, Naturally makes sense.
Yeah, right,
Uh,
right.
and I'd always had an interest in kind of like exercise science. I'd always had an interest in strength and conditioning. I just never really jumped into it. So there was a time at the start of my career actually where so to become a PT, we need to go through a couple of licensing exams. And at the very start of my career, I actually failed my licensing exam. So I lost my license for a little bit, had to go back to being a physiotherapy assistant for a while I was kind of prepping for the next round of the exam. And that's when I was like, oh, maybe I'll just kind of like explore this whole exercise thing. And I found FRC. I think first person I found was James Chung, Chungy Chung.
Yeah,
And
chunky
he's
chug.
he's kind of like he's
Shout
really
out.
shaped a lot of what I've done in the even now, but in the early parts of my career, kind of like starting to understand exercise, starting to become a little bit more interested in it, and then take FRC, and that's kind of what led me down this path, this more movement, this more exercise based path. Well, I went
I
on a
love
tangent.
that.
I totally forgot your question, so hopefully I answered
Yeah, that was a great tangent.
that.
I love when my guests go on tangents. I'm like, yes, keep going, honey. I love that. I did. Did James, is it James? You said James Chung?
James? Yeah.
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 I know him by Chunky Chung. I know people by their Instagram handles. I need to be better with,
Everyone does.
Psst, I'm Fitty with Schmitty.
Yeah. But we're all just
Not,
internet friends. We only know each other by our handles.
I know, I know. What a time to be alive. But
What a wild time.
so yeah. But so I think did he just become a PT? Like he kind of went to school recently.
I think I don't know the specific timelines, but I feel like he's been a PT for a year or so now. I
Yeah.
think. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of followed his story too. I don't know him at all personally, but I do follow
Same.
him. He's done shout out to Chungy Chung if you're listening. Um, and he was on an Exos summit one year when I think it was like early time. I've been at Exos for 4 years almost now, but he was on one of the summits, and then that's kind of how I learned about him. And same thing, he opened my eyes to like the FRC stuff. That's kind of when I went down the rabbit hole. Like I was in it, and then he was there doing the stuff with Exos, and I was like, hell yeah, this is great. So, yeah, it's cool what we can learn from people on the internet and meet people. And I can't even imagine what it was like before,
Yeah. I feel like
networking wise.
everything must have just happened so much for better and for worse, but I feel like everything must have just happened so much slower before.
Yeah. Yeah, like the evolution of education. Like, I mean, there's so much at our fingertips now. Like
Yeah.
you can kind of get little snippets everywhere.
Yeah. And again, for better and for worse, but like there's so much information out there now. Like the whole world is accessible to us pretty much.
I know. That's why I get stressed, if I'm being honest. It's not a bad thing. It's truly a blessing, but I don't know where to start. My interests are kind of going places now. So I don't know if you are in the same boat. Like, is there anything that's kind of catching your attention now, educationally?
I think it's funny because I'm sure it's probably the same for you, but like I feel like if you look at my content or like kind of like what I'm posting, that's almost like a snapshot of like what I'm either learning or experimenting with or seeing a lot of in clinic at that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And then it kind of just like changes over time. But I think like especially right now, it's been trying to like implement a lot more kind of like of later stage rehab stuff. So kind of like our end range speed work, and kind of blending that with some of our more traditional plyometric work because I feel like especially in rehab in traditional rehab fresh out of school, we don't really know how to touch that at all, and that we're actually pretty bad at touching that, and that's often, in my opinion, what leads to struggles with either going back to sport or re-injury, things like that.
Yeah. I also want to mention, I didn't acknowledge this, but I love how you mentioned that you failed. I think that's so powerful because we don't highlight that stuff on anywhere really. And then when it happens to you, you can kind of feel alone. But in reality, there's so many people who've gone through the same thing and they're feeling the same way. So I really appreciate you sharing that because I mean, you're a great clinician, like you're a great therapist and, practitioner. And like you're one of those people I highly regard because you really put out good stuff and that's what the world needs. And so for someone such as yourself to share that you also failed, I think can make people also feel better about, if they've gone through the same thing and there is a way out and you can get better. And I don't know, I feel like you kind of use that failure as motivation in a
Absolutely.
way.
And I think like looking back, of course, even at the very start of it, like looking back, I can kind of see it now as a blessing in disguise, because it kind of helped me reframe a little bit and kind of like switch career paths a little bit. I mean, I was at a clinic at the time where it was not very much in line with what I would be doing now. But it felt like the end of the world at the time, that's for sure. It was like, oh shit,
Yeah.
I can't do, what am I gonna do now? But looking back, I'm not glad it happened, but at the same time, it was good for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you touched on like the later stage rehab stuff too. Um, I so have you taken the ISM course, the internal strength model?
I have. That
Okay.
was Yeah, it was like drinking from a fire hydrant. That was I don't I don't think have you taken it?
No,
Yeah, I
not
think
yet.
so far of all the kind of like FRC courses, that was the most amount of information that we've gotten all at once.
Ooh.
But at this, so I think there was like all of us when we first like that first week back, I think all of us were just trying to absorb some of that information and trying to make things make sense. But it did provide a lot of kind of inspiration or insight into some of those later stage options, I guess.
So could you like water it down for us for the listeners? Like what are your takeaways
I
from the
think
course?
the biggest thing from the course, at least it's all kind of like blended together now. So I think the biggest thing when we first all left, and in my mind, that was the most kind of like almost game changing, was how they conceptualize training connective tissue versus training kind of like muscular tissue. Which prior to that, even though I'd kind of done it during rehab, I never really thought about breaking down the two separately with some of my exercise prescription. So I guess through that lens, when they're thinking about targeting connective tissue, they're more thinking about kind of like your longer holds, kind of working at length instead of just looking for muscle tissue to drive movement. So kind of instead of just finding a bunch of reps here, you're more like really working on that connective tissue's ability to bear load or to
Mm,
for that scaffolding to be there for those muscles to be able to pull on and for everything to still kind of structurally be able to manage the forces that are coming through. Right. So kind of
yeah.
like working through that whole continuum of building someone here first to be able to handle load there and then working them through so that all of that can handle some of that lengthening and then starting to introduce speed into that just at least for me gave me a bit of a framework to start to play with right away. And I feel like over the past year that's been what I've really dug into and started to build into my own kind of framework to make it make a bit more sense in my head.
I love that. So what I see, because I mean, I am totally not I have not taken that, have not really even skimmed the surface, but what I consume on the internet is I see a lot of that, like starting in the shortened position and then searching, I guess, different zones of like, going out into like extended range of motion. And I mean, this is going to be probably a loaded answer, but for a healthy individual, with your like your expertise and your knowledge right now, where would you recommend that go in somebody's training?
Oh, I like that question.
Yeah.
Um, so I feel like I actually like unless I think from what you're saying there's no injury involved here. This is someone
Mm-hmm.
who's healthy. They're just looking for ways to start to incorporate that.
Yeah.
I actually really like blending that in, even if you don't follow kind of like the ISM workflow, or even if you don't kind of build it into their whole conceptual model. I like pairing them or almost working them together with some of those more traditional lifts or some of those more traditional exercises that would almost require or kind of put us in similar ranges of motion or similar positions, right? So say we take that example of like lengthening out through hamstring all the way into like lengthened position or end position. That might be a good pairing with say like some type of hinge or some type of hinge, any movement that kind of brings you into a similar position. I like pairing those two together, but being
Ooh.
mindful of not overspending our resources on one versus the other or on both, right?
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. So, no, that makes perfect sense. So, would you recommend, I guess it depends on the intent of the workout. Like, is it focusing on the conventional lift or like the ISM, like the connective tissue? So, I guess you could pre-fatigue the hinge, or would you use that ISM strategy as a complementary movement almost, or like superset it after the
Mm,
conventional lift? Like the
I
ordering,
like
yeah. How would you order that?
I like supersetting them together, and I think I was having a conversation with Grayson Strange
Oh yeah, he's
after
great.
he's oh man,
Shout out to
so
Grayson.
many shout outs. But I think he was saying the same thing where like before ISM, we were kind of doing these things, we were kind of supersetting these things together in a similar way. So I guess if we even if we again like ignore that whole ISM conceptual approach, I think a similar pairing still exists where you look for a more traditional lift that puts you in a similar position and then pair it or superset it with something end range in a similar position, either training at end range or training into end range.
Love that. That sounds hella juicy. Like some hamstrings? Ooh,
Yeah,
ooh.
is I remember recording that a little bit and then kind of like limping to my car afterwards. Like, what the hell did I just do? It was only like 5 minutes of work, but I think we've all been there.
We've all been there. I've done some like in the beginning I was doing I don't remember what I called it, but I got a nasty quad cramp. It was like a it was like I was extending my leg like in a half kneeling position and I was like trying to go into a knee hinge. So extending my leg and like with hip flexion and I was sore. Like I cramped up so bad in the middle of my quad and then like for a day after that I was like, "Oh my God, did I ruin myself?"
Yeah, very relatable. I can relate very much. I think we've all felt that, especially that quad cramp. That's a nasty one.
I think the worst when I took the FRC course, I did it virtually. I did everything virtually. I still haven't gone in person. But was they tried us, they showed us how to do like knee flexion, PAILS rails, and then
Oh,
they did that on I did it with no other instruction except for okay, squeeze your heel, your glute, and everyone fell to the ground.
everyone
Like
cramps. Yeah,
everyone, hamstrings are just not having it. So
yeah.
it's fun. I love doing that to people now too.
It's almost like, especially if they do it during the seminar, it's almost like a rite of passage. Everyone has to feel it at least once. I
Oh
guess so
yeah.
that they know what's in store for some of their clients on Monday morning when they go back to the gym.
I mean, you gotta taste your own medicine all the
Exactly.
time. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, I see like, you are proof of that when you post your stuff on Instagram. It's like, I like how it's kind of like a journal, right? You
Yeah.
just keep track of what you're learning. I think it's a great tool for that, honestly. It's like a public journal.
Yeah. It's I feel like that was the best thing about starting social media is for me at least, it's like really accelerated my learning because like going back to the captions, I think the captions started because I was just so deathly afraid of people pointing out flaws in what I was doing that I almost like over explained myself in the captions. Like that's genuinely how the captions started. But it was such a great learning experience, like kind of like nitpicking what I was doing myself and over explaining it in the captions and starting to figure things out and looking back in a couple years from now and seeing like what I was thinking and how that might have changed. It's a fun process.
I love that. I've highlighted this a lot, but but like having an open mindset and like changing your mind um, is just super cool to experience in fitness and in anything. I think you should always be able to like be open to things and change your mind because that makes you a better practitioner, coach, etc. Because stuff is always going to be changing. So it is fun to look back. I don't know how long ago you started on Instagram, but I started back in college, and so I try not to go back very often to those first ones because I didn't know what I was doing. But same thing, it's a nice reminder when you feel like you're stagnant or that you don't know a lot. Just look back and you'll see how much you've grown, like you said.
Yeah, because I guess we also don't see day to day how much we are growing or progressing, right? Like I
Right.
think we all tell our clients this as well, probably, but it's like we probably won't see our own progress as much as someone else might, just because of how often we see ourselves and how often we do like an internal audit of ourselves. But like if we go
Mm-hmm.
back, like I don't know, a month back or a year back, I think that's when we can really start to notice some of those changes and some of that growth, which is it's cool to see because it's all there for better or for worse.
Yeah, yeah, for better or for worse, just keep it up there.
Yeah, exactly. There's no shame in some of the stuff that we had from back then. I feel like it would almost be a problem if we agreed 100% or if we were still doing the same things we were a year ago.
100%. It was kind of scary at first for me of like changing my mind or being open to other concepts because I was like, oh no, this one way isn't the right way. Have I been doing stuff wrong? Um, but the biggest thing is you're doing what you think is right at the current moment and you're doing the best you can. So that's what it
Yeah.
comes down to.
Yeah. And I feel like whenever you're like introducing some of these new ways of thinking or some of these new biases, there's always going to be a period where I feel like everything just feels super convoluted and you feel like you don't know anything anymore. And then you start to consolidate all that information and things start to clear up again. And then you introduce a new bias and then you don't know what you're doing again. So I feel like it's just up and down.
It's so fun. I like, it's really fun to feel like that because and like to find something that ignites your passion to learn and to
Mhm.
be a beginner at because there's a lot out there and so not everything's going to stick with you and sometimes you take courses because you have to for continuing education and you just don't know what to spend your money on. But then you find something that you're like, wow, this really challenges me and I don't know anything and this is great. And that's kind of like
Yeah.
you said, you kind of dig yourself into that hole. It's like the whole like gas periodization too. It's just like that model of, being new and then changing your minds, not knowing anything. Then you learn and then you slingshot out. And it's just everything in life I've been relating to that model recently.
Yeah. Yeah. I
I don't
feel
know.
like it reflects most, I don't know, maybe it's just because this is all we think about, but I feel like it reflects most things in life.
Yeah,
Yeah.
1000%. 1000%. Well, we went in a little tangent there, which I'm very happy about. So if anybody has questions about FRC, please reach out to Josh. And I'm just gonna put you out there because you are just like you do that stuff every day. He practices what he preaches with his clients too. So um kind of going on to the next thing. Um what so we kind of talk about what you're nerding out on, but and with your so for you personally, how are you training? Like what is kind of your training style right now for yourself
Mm.
personally?
Yeah. So during the pandemic, I think for most people as well, not many of us had gym access. So that was when the FRC deep dive happened, both kind of like
Mm-hmm.
just learning it and also like applying it to myself. So there was a lot of internal training, a lot of like joint specific training, a lot of like putting myself in a bunch of weird angles. And that led to chasing middle split, which
Oh
is still
yes,
a
yes, let's talk
still
about this
still
journey.
still a bit of a work in progress. I feel like I'm almost there. It's been busy, so I actually haven't gotten too many split sessions in, unfortunately. Gotta start that back up.
Yeah,
Um
this is your reminder. You gotta do
yeah,
it.
exactly. But I feel like that if we go on this tangent, I feel like that was a fun journey to go on because prior to doing a lot of that joint specific work, a lot of that end range stuff, every time I went into like that middle split position or that abducted position, I would just get a sharp pinch in the side of
Mm,
my hip on both hips. So for me personally, that was a really cool thing to see where almost like proof of concept, right? Like after doing a couple of these things, I can unlock some of that range of motion and now I can like really start to open up, right? Like I honestly wish I had more videos or more kind of like photo of evidence of what my squat looked like back in physio school. Like I couldn't get past 90
yeah.
degrees back in physio school. I could barely move back then. So
Wow.
I feel like that's what I usually talk about when clients are like, "Oh, I just don't have mobility or I was just born stiff," because I mean, so was I. Not that I'm super mobile, like, but before I did any of this, I could barely get past 90 degrees. I could barely open my legs out to the side without a sharp pinch. So,
So what
um,
did you do to kind of fix that for yourself?
I deep dove into just a lot of end range and a lot of yeah, a lot of end range training through the hip. If we kind of again going back to FRC, if we just follow
Yeah.
that approach, I was looking at kind of where my hip was limited, where it needed a little bit more work, and I just spent a ton of time during the pandemic, especially just working through there, grinding through a lot of Pails and Rails sets, working through like really opening up a lot of my internal and external rotation. I remember during the start of the pandemic, I was I had set my couch down onto the floor because there was nothing to do, and I was just like sitting on Netflix. And even sitting cross-legged, I would start to feel pain in my knees. And then
Mm-hmm.
that was like, okay, let's just get a shit ton of hip external rotation work. Let's just get a shit ton of hip internal rotation work. And then everything slowly started to open up. So
Yeah.
proof of concept.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
N of one. It's just one case, so it won't work for everyone. But it was really cool to see it all work for myself, which then helps you believe in things, and then helps you kind of like. I feel like you need to have tried something. You need to believe in something if you're going to prescribe it for someone else, right?
1,000%.
Yeah.
That kind of happened to me. I accidentally got the splits because I was working with, I truly was not trying, but I was practicing stuff on myself for one of my goalies that I was working with at the time.
Yeah.
And so I needed to make sure I knew what I was doing. So I would experiment, so I'd experiment on myself. And then we tested his splits one day. And then they were like, Emma, can you do the splits? And I was like, I don't know, but let's see. And I popped right down. Full middle split.
I'm not surprised. I've seen you move. I'm not surprised at all.
I mean, it doesn't help that I'm already mobile, period.
Yeah.
So I have the opposite problem of you. I'm trying to get more stiff. So deadlifting has been my friend. It's just I'm trying to get more compact, more squished.
Yeah, I've been watching your lifting journey in the past couple months. It's been cool to follow.
It's fun, but I'll tell you what, I hate squatting. I mean, this might be a good question. Do you like squatting or deadlifting more?
I definitely feel a lot stronger deadlifting. Um,
Yeah,
I don't mind squatting, but I feel a lot more solid. I feel a lot more just overall strong as when I'm deadlifting.
same.
Yeah.
Yeah. I posted that question on my Instagram a while ago, and it was crazy how many people were squatters instead of deadlifters, especially in the beginning. It was just so many people. And I guess I used to be like that when I was in college. I love squatting because that's what you think of when you do fitness is like squatting.
Yeah.
Because,
Everyone thinks of the squat. I feel like
yeah,
I wonder if there's also just some like inherent fear of deadlifting as well amongst
for
um
sure.
people.
1,000% there's fear because people think they're going to blow their backs out.
Yeah. Which I mean, it ironically, I almost feel stronger when I lift in kind of like a rounded position than in like our traditional like neutral spine, keep brace everything position. Like I feel so much stronger lifting, or I feel so much stronger doing like a Jefferson curl versus just like your conventional deadlift.
I mean, you just mastered that though. There was a time when the loaded Jefferson curl was just going everywhere I was seeing. I never tried it. I was too scared to try that.
I think like for me, it was just part of it was just trying to bait internet hate because that's always fun.
It is fun. When you get haters, you're doing something right.
Exactly. So whenever you see me do rounded back stuff in my story, you'll know I'm just trying to pick up some heat on Instagram.
You gotta, and also you gotta prove the people wrong. Like there's definitely nothing wrong with a rounded back. I mean, that's how live your life. Like you move in these weird positions, and sometimes you don't brace your core when you pick something off the floor. So I think it's good to be prepared for life, and that's kind of like what you preach too with that stuff. And so yeah. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
interesting that you feel stronger with a rounded back. But everyone is different, right? The way anatomically
exactly.
that you are. I'm learning about nutation and counter nutation and like how the pelvis is oriented. And so I'm like, maybe
Oh,
that's
that's fun.
just where your pelvis, is, and that's why you feel strongest there.
Yeah, like please don't listen to this podcast and jump into a bunch of rounded back stuff just because a couple people on the internet said so.
Yeah, don't. Definitely train. Like, I mean, you've been training this heavily, for a very long time. You've worked your way up for a very long time. Um, I mean, I think my bread and butter is spinal segmentation and like I'll do those all the time, every day. I work out is my
They feel great.
segmentations and my cars. So if you're not gonna do Jefferson curls or, most people shouldn't unless you train that and you've worked up to it. But you should be doing your spine health, like minimum maintenance, your segmentations and your cars, in my opinion.
Yeah, you should feel comfortable putting your body into those positions. I like bare minimum. I'll tell patients this all the time. Like I feel like bare minimum, you should feel comfortable moving your body into all of these positions. And then if we want to chase extra weight or extra load on top of that, to I hate the term bulletproof, but I feel like it's a decent term to use here. If you want to quote unquote bulletproof through those areas, then we can start to chase that. But I feel like for the most part, you should be able to move your body into some of these positions without pain, without discomfort.
Yeah. So that's definitely something that I use regularly as cars,
Yeah,
honestly, if I'm going to use anything with people. But then in the setting that I'm at, it's more if people want to work out and they don't have the pay. Like, and I understand, like, you want to get your money's worth out of a workout. That's great. So I don't really do pails and rails that much with people anymore. Um, but this is a question for you. Do you do like the traditional 2 minute passive stretch? Ramp up like that, or have you kind of changed up your duration?
I feel like this will be a. I wonder if this will be a controversial answer actually.
Yeah, let's go
Because
for it.
I
Let's get
feel
the
like
hate.
someone asked me this. I feel like a couple weeks ago, and I kind of gave them a similar answer. But uh, it depends. I'll start with that. But I think if I'm really chasing range of motion, like if that's the primary adaptation that I'm looking for, then yes, I'll probably still stick with the 2+ minute hold. But if I'm more using that Pails and Rails to, sure, like open up range of motion, but also to kind of like work into some of those end range positions or in some other way, maybe to prime the position that we'll be working on later, then maybe I'll just have someone work with, say, like a 10 breath hold instead, almost just to ensure that their system feels comfortable there,
Hmm.
still feed in a bit of that time under tension there, and still get some of those overall range of motion benefits that we're looking for. But I feel like it's a much easier sell than 2 minutes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm happy you said that because that's exactly where I'm at. And I felt like for the longest time, like the police would come after me if I didn't do 2 minutes.
As
And
at
I,
one minute 55 seconds and
I truly was like, am I a bad practitioner now because I am not doing the 2 minute holds, but like nobody wants to sit in a 2 minute hold. I lost so like attention spans just aren't there. But I think you are right with it with if you're trying to gain range of motion, you should probably use that whole 2 minutes. But I've started to go towards the latter end, as you mentioned, the I like the 10 breath hold. I haven't thought of doing it that way, but that gives you
yeah,
something to actually I don't know, quantify your time with.
yeah. And depending on how slow they're breathing, it kind of sometimes gets close to that 2 minutes. I don't think it'll ever be a true 2 minutes with a 10 breath hold, but we're close. We do what we can.
Yeah, but I think it's cool to clarify that here is because it's not black and white. So there is
Yeah.
a really beautiful flow of like a chart of, how they have everything laid out and how it should be done. But like you said, it's all about the intent and what it's being used for. So I really like that other end of just getting the experience in that position prior, so priming your system prior to your lift, for example, and doing a shorter duration. So that's cool.
Yeah. And I think like when I was first feeling guilty about some of these things, I don't know who said this, but I saw this somewhere, but they were like, it's their system because it works for them like that. And I don't think it'll ever 100% work the way it does for them for us because at the end of the day, we're seeing different people. We have slightly different experiences coming into this. We have slightly different worldviews. So I feel like once we understand what we need to from a certain system, I feel like it is important to try and blend that or try and build that into or make it our own in some way, to make it
Yeah,
work best for those that we're working with instead of trying to fit someone else's system to our own, I guess.
I love that you said that. I think everyone needs to hear that. I know I did, honestly, because I felt guilty too. It was weird. I was kind of jaded too. I was like, "Ugh, I'm not following the system right. Like, I am, like, who's this work for?" But now I understand it's a method and methods work, but also, again, you can personalize them. It's not like the end all be all. Just like with your training, it's a blueprint. So if something's not working, you can make an audit and you can kind of sub stuff out. So I'm happy that we could kind of bring that up and clarify to people who, and maybe people who haven't taken the cert yet, you know, you can make it your own. It's that simple.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, well, kind of to bring this all together here, my last thing I like to talk about on my episodes is kind of like, okay, so you went through PT school, you kind of knew that was your thing all along, and you kind of touched on some adversity, but was there a moment that stuck out to you that was like, okay, this is a really hard time, maybe like an adversity, and you kind of overcame that?
I think professionally, the biggest thing would be at the start of my career. Like we touched on it, but at the start of my career, when I did fail my licensing exam, and it was it was a weird coincidence because that was also the first year where our governing body made it so that so to go back, um, we split our licensing exam, at least back then, into two parts, right? There's a written and then there's a practical component, right? So after you do the written, after you pass the written, you can practice as a resident physiotherapist, until you pass your practical component, and then you're just a full on full fledged physio. But my cohort, my year was the first year where if you failed your practical, then they would remove that resident license and you couldn't practice in the meantime. Whereas the years before, they could still continue on as a
Mm.
resident. So for me, it was like failed the exam. It was my fault. I went through school. Um, I was one of those kids who, luckily, I guess, never really had to study hard. So
One of
I
those.
took, yeah, yeah, but it bit me in the ass clearly, right? Because like I took that same approach with this licensing exam. Um, I don't think it's a good exam anyways, but that's just sour grapes. But like when I went into that exam, I probably like Googled sample questions the night before. So I didn't have much of an idea of what I was going into. I thought it'd be exactly the same as what all of our exams were like in school. And at the end of the day, they were. It was just the scale was a bit bigger.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I kind of lost my train of thought. But yeah, I lost my license, had to kind of like go, but it was a bit of a hit to the ego because it was almost like I finished physio school, I was working as a resident, but then all of a sudden I'm back working as a physio assistant just because I kind of wanted to stay relevant in the kind of like inside this whole like physio fitness space. So yeah, that was a interesting time. It was a looking back, it was a good way to see different things and kind of understand how different clinicians did things and
Yeah.
kind of like consolidate my own worldview, consolidate my own frameworks. But at the time, it was it wasn't fun.
Yeah. Well, so did you have to did you get to retake it, I guess? Like, or
I
did you have to
did,
go take a course again, or just you just got to retake it?
yeah. It's again, I don't have many positive things to say about the exam in general. It was it's a bit of a money grab.
Yeah.
But they only run it every 6 months, so I had to wait 6 months, kind of prep for the exam. And in the meantime, I was just kind of just fucking around as a physio assistant.
Well, I like really appreciate you sharing that. Honestly, like I said earlier, it's relatable. We've all like tried to get something and failed at some point. And so it's all about how you pick yourself up after that happens. And do you stay down or do you get up type of thing? And so
Yeah.
I'm just happy you stuck it out because look at you now, like you're just crushing it and you're just making it your own. So I think that's so inspiring.
Yeah. I'm can't say I'm thankful for it, but it was a helpful time. It was a helpful time to go through.
Yeah. Well, okay. So last thing here, if you could give your younger self a piece of advice, what would it be?
Ooh. I tend to overthink things, and I tend to kind of like on top of overthinking things, I feel like I just like jump into things, or I feel like I have to do things 100% if I'm going into something. And I feel like that's never a good way to get started into anything. I think we probably all tell this to our clients as well, but just start small, kind of like build those habits first, and then we can always build off of that once we know that that's something that we are comfortable doing or something that we're interested or even want to do.
Yeah, I
You
love
know?
that. Thank you for that wisdom, Josh. Well, kind of landing this plane here, where can everybody find you?
I'm mainly on Instagram at curated mobility. I mean, I guess I'm also on TikTok as well, but that's more just the same handle, but TikTok I feel like is more just to generate hate. Because
Yes.
TikTok is wild. There's so much more angry comments on. I feel like Instagram is kind of like a safe, at least I've built it into a bit of like a safe echo chamber, whereas
Yeah, yeah.
TikTok is the Wild West, and it's fun. It's a fun way to generate attention, I guess, to kind of funnel into Instagram.
Do you use the same content? Sidebar, do you use the same content or do you switch it up kind of for the platforms?
I used to use the same content. Now, like I'm not that active on TikTok, but I think my strategy on TikTok is to switch it up a little bit because I feel like stuff that does well on Instagram doesn't usually do well on TikTok. I feel like it's
Yeah.
quite different what does well. And again, like I'm not that active on TikTok, but if I were to be, I would probably edit things slightly different or just kind of switch up what I'm doing on TikTok versus on Instagram.
That makes sense. I think the Wild West is the best way to explain TikTok.
It is it's a fun place. You need
Yeah.
thick skin on TikTok.
Yeah, I ain't got that. So I had one hater one time and it messed me up, but I'm
Oh,
okay
my
now.
my first hater was that was an interesting experience also. I was so like it hurt my first
It
one, but like
does. It
now,
hurts.
yeah, whatever. It is what it is now. I don't really care
Like I said, you're doing something right, buddy. So,
anymore
well, Josh, thank you for being here today and like spending your time with me on a weekend to film this.
now.
I just appreciate that time and it was really fun chatting with you.
Yeah, thank you. That was fun. I feel like that was, I mean, we haven't really actually chatted, so I think that was the longest we've actually ever spoken in one go.
It was. It's always just commenting back like, "Yo, this is sick," or like,
Yeah.
juicy
Yeah,
hamstrings."
exactly.
Well, just keep educating the people and
I'll try. Thank
but
you.
yeah, you're welcome. All right.